And welcome back to another daily devotion. I am Pastor Roy here at Woodlawn Christian Church in Lake City, Iowa, and this devotion is for Thursday, November 2nd of 2023. We are in the book of Ephesians. Today we're going to wrap up chapter 5. We're going to look at verses 21 to 33. Now, remember that when they divided up the chapters and verses, it was done much later than when the letters were written. Hundreds of years, 1,000 years later, over 1,000 years actually. And we may like for them, I may have liked for them to divide them somewhat different than they did. Because this starts a new section here where we're at in 21 to 33, and it really spills over into chapter 6 through verse 9. To me, that would have been a better thing to divide off as a chapter. So I would have rather have seen them do chapter 6 and chapter 7 with the rest of it. But they didn't ask Pastor Roy. I wasn't around, to be quite blunt. So there's three things going on here. We're going to talk about husband and wives. We're going to talk about children and parents. We're going to talk about slaves and masters. And the very first verse here that we're going to deal with today, verse 21, applies to this whole section from from chapter 5:21, or 22 rather, because 21 applies to what goes below it, from verse 22 all the way to chapter 6 verse 9. So that would be this verse: be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. One another, it's meaning that each of these sections, these three sections, has two parties to them. We'll leave the last two till tomorrow. We'll talk more about that. Though a lot of what we're going to talk about today will spill over into that, and we'll be doing repetition again tomorrow probably. But this one is probably the most controversial, because it's talking about husbands and wives. And so sometimes people can kind of get their backs up over this, if you want to say it that way. They can kind of get, and sometimes people can very much misuse this. Use it as a club when it's actually supposed to be, you have, with power comes great responsibility. I think I heard that one in a superheroes cartoon once upon a time. But at any rate, verses 21 to 33 in chapter 5 of Ephesians. Let's read through it and see what we can come up with here. Just a second. I take a drink. I'm still dealing with a little bit of a sinus issue from yesterday. I apologize. Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands, as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. As the church is subject to Christ, so let wives also be subject in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Even so, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, as Christ does the church, because we are members of this body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is a profound one, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Very much we've gotten into a bit of a problem. And I'll confess, in my first marriage, I didn't understand these verses. Had I really understood these verses prior to getting married, I would have done one of two things: not gotten married, or I would have stayed married. If we both would have understood that the role that we're supposed to have. I don't think we do a good enough job of teaching children what they need to remember, and that is, now you're subject to one another. That's the first verse out of the gate. Remember that. It's not like the wife is completely at the beck and call of the husband. The husband has a great responsibility to his wife. And that is to care for her, to cherish her, to love her, and to provide for her, and all of those things. You are supposed to be there for her. She is more precious and more important than you. Just as Christ died for the church, for us, the husband is supposed to literally put their life on the line if need be, and caring for them and providing for them and the family. It's a very important role, especially in the time of Paul. And perhaps there's some difference in that nowadays. We could argue the semantics of that somewhat, but I would beg to differ that we probably need to hold it more closely in line with this than we want to do, because there is great honor in that. We remember that when we get married, marriage is something that is a very, very important thing. It is a covenant, and I've talked about this in other videos at length, and we have to do it again here. When you are married, you become not one or two, but one. You are joined, and this is a covenant. You've made a covenant not only with your spouse, but much more importantly, you've made a covenant with God, and that you therefore don't break covenants that you make with God. That's why divorce is a sin. That's why it's a very difficult sin, and it's a sin that I have to atone for when I stand before the judgment seat. And I'm quite aware of that, and painfully sometimes, as I should say, aware of that. And it is supposed to be that we are not supposed to go into marriage flippantly, without expectations, without understanding that we are to be reverent to one another, that we are bound to one another, that we have great obligations to one another, and that means, when I do weddings, one of the things I say is that from now on, husband, that means that her happiness is more important than yours, and to her, his happiness is more important than yours. That's a big part of that. You're supposed to be self-sacrificing one for the other. Now, remember that in the time that we are in, the husbands would have been probably 10 to 15 years older than the wife, and so obviously they're more established in the world. They're more advanced. So there's that aspect of it as well. So we understand that, but still, we do need to, not that they are subordinate to us, but that as a husband, you have a great obligation. But the wife has an obligation too, to love and to cherish their husband, to take care of them. And again, just as I said, in those vows that I always, they're not in the vows, but in the message I give to people, I always talk about that you need to understand that your husband, your wife's desires are more important than yours. Wife, husband's desires are more important than yours, and you both need to be living that. You need to both be sacrificing one for the other, and too often we don't do that. I want my way, or the highway, and we have great problems with that. We get into arguments. We argue over fickle, stupid things, quite honestly, and we don't communicate. And if you're one body, if you're one person, don't you think in your head? Do you communicate yourself? You should be communicating with your spouse. Certainly, that was an aspect of my issue. Was insufficient communication, getting upset and holding back. I won't divulge the reason for the divorce because I've never told her why we got divorced, and why should I tell the world? I won't. But nonetheless, there's aspects of that. And there we need to get back to that place where we need to really, really focus on the importance of marriage, the tragedy of divorce. We have a lot of problems with society, falls out of this whole thing of broken families. And I think I've talked about that before in other devotions, in other videos. Absence of fathers, broken families, all of that. It's a big part of the problem we have in the world. But I won't belabor that at this point. But here we are supposed to love each other. We're supposed to provide for one another. We're supposed to be reverent for each other as we are to reverent Christ. But the husband does have a very, very important and responsibility. Rather than looking at it as you have these powers over your wife, look at it that you have these responsibilities to your wife, just as God has responsibilities to you, to love and to protect you. That is the way we need to look at it as men. Okay, don't look at it as we're lording over our wives. We look at it as we need to take care of them. It's our obligation. We signed on the dotted line. We swore to her, we swore to God that we would take care of them as if they were our own body. And so think that's enough for today. I think I'm straining my voice a little bit. We'll pick up. Maybe we'll talk more about it tomorrow as we talk about the children of parents and the slaves and the masters. We'll pick that part up. And then that will be Friday's devotion. And then Monday we'll probably Monday we'll finish up with Ephesians and probably pick up with Colossians, because that just seems kind of to make sense. Ephesians and Colossians just kind of roll together, as we said at the beginning of this devotion. Have a blessed day, and please, please, please be a blessing to someone today. If you enjoy these devotions, if you gain anything from it, please do like and subscribe. We'd love to have you back with us again. We'd love to see you around. Take care. God bless. God loves you. Bye-bye.